The crystal being stood in the center of Earth's orbital station, and its body shimmered with colors that had no names in human language. Commander Lee Hyun watched it carefully, while Dr. Park Ji-won took notes on her tablet, and Captain Kim Min-ho kept his hand near his sidearm. The alien called itself Veltar, and it had traveled across the galaxy to reach this small blue world that most species considered insignificant. President Choi Soo-min sat at the head of the conference table, and her expression was calm, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her hands together. Around the table sat the most important people from Earth's government and military. They had been preparing for first contact for decades, but nothing could have prepared them for what Veltar had just told them. The galaxy was dying. Veltar's voice came through the translation device as musical tones that somehow conveyed desperation and fear. The Void Swarm has consumed 17 star systems in the past cycle alone, it said, and the holographic display showed dark shapes moving between the stars like hungry shadows. Our fleets retreat faster than we can rebuild them. Our worlds fall silent one by one. The Coalition Council has voted unanimously for the first time in 3,000 years. Lee Hyun leaned forward in his chair. What did they vote for? To seek help from species not yet part of the Coalition, to find those who might fight differently than we do. Veltar's crystalline form flickered and changed color to what the translation device called regret. You are our last hope. The silence in the room stretched for long seconds. Dr. Park Ji-won was the first to speak. You said the Coalition has 12 member species with technology thousands of years ahead of ours. Your ships can cross the galaxy in weeks while ours barely reach the nearest star. What could we possibly offer that you don't already have? Veltar's form shifted again, and this time the colors were harder to read. Your species is young, perhaps too young to know that some wars cannot be won through wisdom and technology alone. The Void Swarm learns from every battle. It adapts to our weapons and our tactics. We fight, as we always have, fought for millions of years with honor, and precision and calculated risk. The Swarm has learned to counter all of it. Captain Kim Min-ho spoke up from where he sat near the wall. So you want us because we're stupid enough to try something different? Not stupid, Veltar said, and its form brightened. Unpredictable. Your species has a reputation even in the Outer Rim. You fight wars that other species would surrender from. You take risks that seem insane to older civilizations. You adapt, faster than any species we have encountered. President Choi Soo-min finally spoke, and her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what was being discussed. Show us what we're facing. The holographic display changed, and suddenly the room was filled with images that made several people push back from the table. The Void Swarm looked like living darkness given form and purpose. Individual creatures were the size of battleships and moved through space like they were swimming through water. They covered entire planets in writhing mass that pulsed with sick light. They consume everything, Veltar explained. Not just organic matter, but metal and energy and even the fabric of space itself. Where they feed, reality becomes weaker and strange things happen. Some of our scientists believe they are not from this dimension at all. Lee Hyun studied the images with the eye of a military strategist. He had spent 20 years in Earth's defense forces and had seen humanity fight wars against impossible odds before. What weapons work against them? Plasma cannons can burn through their outer shells if you maintain sustained fire for several minutes. Quantum torpedoes can disrupt their neural networks temporarily. Energy shields can protect ships for a short time, but the Swarm learns to counter them within hours of first contact. What about kinetic weapons? Veltar paused, and its colors shifted to confusion. Kinetic weapons? You mean physical projectiles? Those have not been used in galactic warfare for over 50,000 years. They are considered primitive and inefficient. Slow smile spread across Lee Hyun's face, and he exchanged looks with Kim Min-ho, who was grinning like a wolf. Dr. Park, do we still have those old nuclear missiles in the Titan storage facility? Park Ji-won checked her tablet and nodded. About 3,000 of them. Why would you want nuclear weapons when they're offering us plasma technology? Because sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Lee Hyun turned back to Veltar. What do you know about human military history? Very little. Your species has only been space-capable for 50 years. Before that, you were confined to a single world. And on that single world, we spent 10,000 years learning how to kill things that were bigger and stronger and faster than us. We learned how to kill things that could fly when we couldn't. We learned how to kill things that lived in the water when we couldn't breathe there. We learned how to kill each other with rocks and sticks and fire. And then we learned how to kill each other with metal and explosives and radiation. President Choi So-man was watching Lee Hyun with growing concern. Commander, where exactly are you going with this? Ma'am, these aliens have been fighting the same way for millions of years. They use energy weapons and shields and tactics that are probably older than human civilization. The swarm has had time to adapt to all of it, but it's never faced anything. Like us. Veltar's form was cycling through colors rapidly now. You would join our war? Your species would risk extinction to help people you have never met? Kim Minho stood up from his chair and his hand was no longer near his weapon but crossed over his chest in a gesture of respect. That's what humans do. When someone asks for help, we help. When someone threatens innocent people, we fight. When someone tells us something is impossible, we prove them wrong. But you must understand the risk, Veltar said, and its voice carried harmonics of grief. The Kethmaran Empire had 12 billion souls, and the finest fleet in the Outer Rim. The swarm consumed their homeworld in 6 hours. The Velkari coalition fought for 300 years before falling. Species that have mastered time and space have been reduced to refugees fleeing in whatever ships they could find. Dr. Park Ji-won was studying the tactical displays with growing excitement. The swarm adapts to energy-based attacks, but has it ever faced biological weapons? Chemical weapons? What about cyber warfare or psychological operations? I do not understand these terms. Lee Hyun's smile was getting wider. Veltar, how long would it take for you to get us star charts and information about swarm movements? Such information could be transmitted to you within hours. But surely you need time to prepare to build new ships and train your forces? We've been preparing for this fight our whole lives. We just didn't know what we were preparing for. Lee Hyun looked around the table at his colleagues and saw the same expression on every face. It was the look humans got when someone told them something couldn't be done. We'll need those star charts and any intelligence you have on swarm behavior. We'll also need you to do us one favor. Name it. Stay out of our way. President Choi So-man stood up and the weight of speaking for all humanity settled on her shoulders. Veltar, please transmit our response to your coalition council. Tell them that Earth accepts their request for military assistance. Tell them that humanity will join this war and we will fight it our way. Tell them that when the galaxy called for help, humanity answered with flames. Veltar's crystalline form blazed, with light so bright that everyone in the room had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the alien's voice carried harmonics that the translation device rendered as hope mixed with terror. I will tell them, but I fear they are not prepared for what you will bring to this war. Lee Hyun was already thinking about troop deployments and supply lines and the 100,000 details that would determine victory or defeat. Neither is the swarm. Admiral Nam Tae-hyun stood on the bridge of the Earth battleship Seoul's Pride and watched the Kepler 442 system grow larger on the main display. Behind him, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled moved through space like a school of metal fish. 57 ships carried everything Earth could spare, and some things it probably couldn't afford to lose. 3 months had passed since Veltar's visit, and those months had been the busiest in human history. Every shipyard on Earth and Mars worked around the clock. Old weapons were pulled from storage and new ones were built from blueprints that hadn't seen light for decades. The asteroid belt mining stations were stripped of raw materials, and entire cities volunteered their metal just to build more ships. Admiral, we're receiving communication from coalition forces, reported Lieutenant Yu Jisoo from her station. Admiral Zethkara wants to discuss tactical coordination. Nam Tae-hyun nodded. Put him through. The main display switched to show a being that looked like a cross between a mantis and a tree. Zethkara's species had been fighting the void swarm for longer than humans had existed, and the wear showed in every line of his angular face. Admiral Nam Tae-hyun, I welcome you to this system, but I must express concern about your approach vector. You are heading directly toward the swarm concentration. instead of taking a defensive position behind our shield grid. Nam Taehyun studied the tactical display that showed coalition ships arranged in careful formations several million kilometers from the swarm. How long have you been fighting them here? 6 standard months. We have contained them to the outer system but cannot advance further. Their adaptive capabilities make direct assault impossible. We estimate another year of attrition warfare before we can safely approach their position. Admiral Zethkara, with respect, your species has been fighting these things for centuries and you're still losing ground. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. The alien's expression was hard to read, but his voice carried tones of confusion. Different how? We employ the most advanced tactical systems in the galaxy. Our weapons are precise and our shields are impenetrable by known swarm capabilities. That's the problem. They know your capabilities. Nam Taehyun turned to his weapons officer. Commander Han Dongwoo, are our special packages ready? Han Dongwoo grinned like he was about to open birthday presents. All 3,000 nuclear missiles are armed and ready. The kinetic bombardment arrays are loaded with tungsten rods. The chemical weapons are mixed and the biological agents are viable. The communication channel went silent for several seconds. When Zethkara spoke again, his voice was higher pitched. Did you say nuclear weapons? And biological agents? Those are forbidden by every civilized species in the galaxy. Good thing we're not civilized yet. Nam Taehyun gestured to his helmsman. Take us in, full speed. The human fleet accelerated toward the swarm, and every ship in the coalition fleet watched in horror as 57 vessels charged directly at an enemy that had destroyed entire star systems. On the bridge of Soul's Pride, the crew worked with calm efficiency that came from years of training for exactly this moment. Swarm creatures are moving to intercept, reported the sensor officer. 47 large forms and approximately 300 smaller ones. Perfect. Launch the appetizers. The first wave of human weapons was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 50,000 years. Nuclear missiles streaked across space on pillars of flame, while kinetic bombardment rods accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. Swarm creatures tried to adapt their defenses the way they always did, but there was nothing to adapt to. Energy shields meant nothing to physical projectiles moving at incredible speed. Adaptive armor that could counter plasma beams was helpless against nuclear fire that simply vaporized everything within kilometers. The swarm creatures that had learned to counter every coalition weapon found themselves dying to technology their enemies had abandoned before humans learned to make fire. First wave impact in 10 seconds, Han Dongwoo reported. Nuclear yields are nominal. Kinetic penetrators are on target. The first swarm creature to die had been consuming coalition ships for 6 months and had adapted to 17 different types of energy weapons. The tungsten rod that punched through its core at 20% light speed didn't give it time to adapt to anything. Admiral Zethkara's voice came over the communication channel, and his carefully controlled tone couldn't hide his shock. How? Is this possible? Those creatures survived direct hits from quantum artillery. Quantum artillery is fancy. Kinetic energy is forever. Nam Taehyun watched as his weapons tore through swarm formations like they were made of paper. Launch second wave. Time to get creative. The second wave included weapons that made coalition observers question humanity's sanity. Chemical agents that ate through swarm bioarmor like acid. Biological weapons that turned the creature's own healing abilities against them. Cyber warfare programs that had been designed to fight human AI, but worked just fine on alien neural networks. But the real shock came when the swarm broke through the human defensive line. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Sora led the first boarding party onto a swarm creature that was the size of a city block and twice as mean. Her Marines wore powered armor and carried weapons that would have been considered war crimes on most civilized worlds. They went into the belly of the beast with plasma, cutters and explosive charges, and the kind of enthusiasm that most species reserved for recreational activities. Marine 1 to Fleet Command. Sora's voice came over the communication system along with sounds of explosions and inhuman screaming. We're inside the big ugly one. It doesn't like visitors. Copy, Marine 1. What's your status? Having the time of our lives, sir. These things are tough on the outside but squishy on the inside. We've planted charges on what looks like neural clusters, and we're working our way toward what might be a central nervous system. Admiral Zethkara was broadcasting on an open channel now, and his voice carried tones of disbelief. They're inside the creatures, fighting them in close combat. This is madness. Engineer Han Dongwu looked up from his weapon systems. Admiral, should I tell him about the flamethrowers? Let's keep some surprises for later. The battle lasted 4 hours, and when it was over, the Kepler 442 system was free of void swarm presence for the first time in 6 months. Not a single swarm creature escaped, and the human fleet had lost only 3 ships to enemy action. The Coalition fleet had been fighting the same enemy for half a year and hadn't managed to destroy a single large creature. Admiral Zethkara requested permission to come aboard Seoul's Pride, and Nam Tae-hyun agreed out of curiosity. The alien admiral arrived with a small escort, and his first words were not what anyone expected. How do you sleep at night? Usually pretty well. Why? Your species fights like demons from the void themselves. You use weapons banned by every civilized culture. You attack enemies in ways that violate every principle of honorable warfare. You board enemy vessels and fight creatures hand-to-hand when any sane being would maintain safe distance. Nam Tae-hyun poured himself coffee from the pot that never seemed to empty on a military ship. Admiral Zethkara, let me tell you something about my species. Every other intelligent race in the galaxy evolved to survive in their environment. Humans evolved to kill everything in our environment that might threaten our families. We spent 1,000,000 years learning how to hunt things bigger than us, and eat things meaner than us, and survive things that should have killed us. But the violence, the brutality of your methods, is necessary. Your people fight wars like they're playing chess. Every move is calculated and honorable and predictable. The swarm learned to counter that centuries ago. My people fight wars like we're trying to protect our children from monsters that want to eat them, because that's exactly what we're doing. Zethkara was quiet for a long moment. The Coalition Council will want to know how you achieved this victory. Tell them we followed human doctrine. When someone threatens innocent people, you don't negotiate with them or contain them or find an honorable way to coexist. You kill them all and make sure they can never threaten anyone again. The alien admiral looked out the viewport at the debris field that had once been a swarm concentration. And if the swarm adapts to your methods? Nam Tae-hyun smiled, and his expression was not entirely pleasant. Then we'll adapt faster. That's what humans do. We change, and we learn, and we never stop fighting until the job is done. The swarm picked the wrong species to mess with. As the human fleet prepared to move to their next target, Admiral Zethkara transmitted a message to the Coalition Council that would change galactic warfare forever. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. The humans have achieved total victory at Kepler 442. Enemy casualties total 100%. Human casualties are minimal. Recommend immediate strategic coordination with human forces. Also recommend psychological counseling for Coalition officers who witness human combat methods. They fight like their entire species depends on victory. Nam Tae-hyun didn't know it yet, but those words would echo through Coalition space and reach species that had been fighting hopeless defensive wars for generations. For the first time since the Void Swarm appeared, the galaxy had hope, and the humans were just getting started. Dr. Song Yoonji stared at the microscopic images on her screen and felt the kind of excitement that scientists dream about their entire careers. 6 months after the victory at Kepler 442, the human research teams had been studying captured swarm specimens, and what they found changed everything humanity thought it knew about their enemy. General Bay, the preliminary results are in, she said as the military commander entered her laboratory on the Coalition research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. You're going to want to sit down for this. General Bei Jinsu had been coordinating human military operations across 12 star systems, and his face showed the strain of managing a war that spanned light years. Doctor, I've seen reports that the swarm is adapting to our kinetic weapons. Tell me you have good news. Better than good news. I have a weapon that will make our previous victories look like training exercises. Song Yoonji pulled up a holographic display that showed the internal structure of a swarm creature. Look at this neural network. See these quantum-linked spores? That's how they share information across vast distances. When one creature learns something, all of them learn it within hours. That explains how they adapt so quickly. Exactly. But here's the beautiful part. They share information, but they don't share immune responses. Each creature's biological systems are unique to its local environment. Song Yunji's smile was the kind that made other scientists nervous. I've been working with samples of Earth bacteria, common stuff that exists in every human gut. Beijinsu looked at the bacterial cultures with growing understanding. You want to use biological warfare? Not biological warfare. Biological annihilation. These creatures have never encountered Earth-based microorganisms. They have no immunity to them at all. I can create bacterial strains that will spread through their entire nervous system in minutes. The best part is that by the time they try to adapt, the bacteria will have already killed them. The general was quiet for a long moment. Doctor, the coalition species are already disturbed by our methods. If we start using biological weapons, they might withdraw their support. General, with respect, the coalition species have been losing this war for centuries using their methods. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what makes them comfortable and start worrying about what wins battles. 3 systems away. Sergeant Major Kang Hyok was having a similar conversation with a group of coalition officers who had volunteered for human tactical training. The session was taking place in a mock-up of a swarm hive structure, and the alien soldiers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy. The problem with your species, Kang Hyok told the assembled officers, is that you fight like you're trying to win points in a competition. Honor points and efficiency points and minimizing casualty points. Human soldiers fight like they're trying to kill everything that threatens their family because that's exactly what we're doing. Commander Velnara of the Altarian Defense Corps spoke up from where she crouched behind cover. Sergeant Major, your methods are effective, but they seem to involve significant risk to your own forces. Surely there are ways to achieve victory without such brutal tactics. Kang Hyok detonated a training charge that filled the mock hive with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Commander, let me tell you about the Battle of Seoul during our Third World War. Human soldiers held a city against enemy forces 10 times their size for 6 months. They didn't hold it by being careful or minimizing risk. They held it by making the enemy pay for every meter in blood and making it cost more to take the city than it was worth. But the casualties must have been enormous. Fewer casualties than if we had lost. Dead soldiers can't protect their families. Sometimes the only choice is between fighting dirty and fighting losing. Kang Hyok led the group through a corridor filled with training obstacles that represented swarm defensive systems. Your people have been fighting clean for centuries and losing ground every year. My people fight dirty and we win. The alien officers tried to follow human tactical doctrine, but their centuries of civilized warfare made it almost impossible. Where humans saw opportunities for ambush, they saw dishonorable attacks. Where humans saw acceptable losses, they saw needless casualties. Where humans saw total war, they saw violations of every military principle their species had developed. But the results spoke for themselves. Coalition forces trained in human methods achieved victory rates that their own command structure found difficult to believe. More importantly, they stopped losing ground to the swarm for the first time in living memory. The real test came when human-trained coalition forces were deployed to defend the Vega colonies. The swarm had been moving toward the heavily populated system for months, and coalition strategists estimated the colonies had weeks before the enemy arrived in force. Kang Hyok led a mixed unit of human marines and alien soldiers in a mission that violated every rule of engagement the coalition had ever written. Instead of waiting for the swarm to attack, they tracked the enemy to its staging area using improvised sensors built from salvaged swarm technology. Command, this is Alpha. Team, Kang Hyok reported from deep inside enemy territory. We've located the main swarm concentration, approximately 50,000 individual creatures massed for assault on Vega colonies. Copy, Alpha Team. Fall back to safe distance and call in orbital bombardment. Negative, Command. We're going to handle this personally. What happened next became legend among coalition forces. Kang Hyok's team didn't attack the swarm concentration directly. They studied it for 3 days and identified the creatures that seemed to be coordinating the assault. Then they infiltrated the enemy formation using stolen swarm biosignatures and planted nuclear charges on every command creature they could reach. The explosion could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the smoke cleared the swarm force, heading for Vega had been completely destroyed, and the human alien team had tracked the survivors back to their source. Coalition Command expected a request for reinforcements or heavy weapons. Instead, they got a message that redefined their understanding of human warfare. Command, this is Alpha Team. We've located the swarm breeding facility. Transmitting coordinates. Now. Recommend immediate quarantine of surrounding space. We're going in. Alpha Team, you are ordered to maintain safe distance and wait for backup. Command, with respect, backup will just slow us down. We're going to burn their house down. The breeding facility was a structure the size of a small moon that had been growing in the darkness between stars for centuries. It produced millions of swarm creatures every year, and its destruction would cripple enemy operations across dozens of systems. Coalition forces had known about its existence for decades, but considered it too heavily defended to attack. Kang Hayek's team spent 2 weeks infiltrating the facility using methods that would have horrified their commanders. They used swarm corpses as camouflage. They followed waste disposal tunnels through areas too toxic for most life forms. They planted improvised explosives made from captured enemy ammunition. When they finally triggered their charges, the breeding facility died in a chain reaction that lasted for hours. The explosion was so massive that it created a temporary star that illuminated dead systems for light years in every direction. Coalition forces monitoring the battle couldn't understand what they were seeing. The tactical displays showed impossible energy readings and gravitational anomalies that defied their understanding of physics. When they finally established communication with Alpha Team, the conversation was brief. Alpha Team report status. Mission. Accomplished command. Target destroyed. All objectives achieved. What about casualties?
Enemy casualties total 100%. Friendly casualties are acceptable. The success at the breeding facility marked a turning point in the war. For the first time since the Void Swarm appeared, coalition forces were advancing instead
of retreating. Swarm-controlled systems were being liberated at a rate that shocked both sides of the conflict. But the victory came with a cost that troubled coalition leadership. Human methods were brutally effective, but they changed everyone who used them. Alien soldiers trained in human tactics became harder and more ruthless. Species that had spent millennia developing civilized approaches to warfare found themselves adopting methods they would have considered barbaric months earlier. Dr. Song Yunji's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective against swarm creatures, but they also raised questions about the kind of galaxy that would exist after the war ended. General Bei Jinsu's total war doctrine achieved victories that saved billions of lives, but it required sacrificing the moral principles that many species considered fundamental to civilization. The debate reached its peak when the Coalition Council convened an emergency session to discuss human military methods. Species that had been grateful for human assistance were now questioning whether the cure might be worse than the disease. Ambassador Ryu Chanwu represented humanity at the emergency session, and his response to coalition concerns became one of the most quoted speeches in galactic history. You called for help when your civilized methods were failing and your people were dying. We answered that call, and we fought the way humans fight when everything we love is threatened. What? If our methods disturb you, then I suggest you win this war quickly, so we can all go back to being civilized. But Fleet Admiral Oh Seung-hwan stood before the largest military assembly in galactic history and looked out at ships from 47 different species. The combined fleet stretched across space for millions of kilometers and represented every warship the galaxy could spare. Behind him, the main display showed their destination, and every being in the fleet felt the same cold fear when they looked at it. The Andromeda Gap was a region of space where reality seemed broken. Stars died young and space itself was twisted into impossible shapes. No probe sent into the gap had ever returned, and no ship that entered had ever been seen again. But intelligence gathered over months of desperate fighting had confirmed what everyone feared most. The Void Swarm's primary nest was there. Officers and crew of the Allied fleet, Oh Seung-hwan began, and his voice carried across communication channels to every ship in the Armada. 6 months ago, the galaxy was losing a war that had lasted for centuries. Today we stand at the edge of enemy home territory with the largest fleet ever assembled and the firepower to crack planets. The holographic display changed to show reconnaissance, data that made experienced military officers flinch. The swarm nest was a structure so vast that it defied comprehension. It was part space station and part living creature and part something that had no name in any language. Millions of swarm creatures moved around it like antibodies protecting some cosmic infection. Intelligence estimates that the primary nest has been growing for over 3 million years, continued Oh Seung-hwan. It contains the accumulated knowledge and genetic material of every species the swarm has ever consumed. If we fail here, the swarm will have learned everything they need to counter our methods, and the war will be lost. Major Im So-young had spent weeks analyzing the reconnaissance. Data and what she discovered was worse than anyone imagined. Admiral, the nest isn't just a breeding facility, it's a processing center. Every species the swarm consumes is studied and cataloged, and their biological distinctiveness is added to the swarm collective. They don't just kill civilizations, they steal everything that made those civilizations unique. Captain Lim Jae-hyun commanded the human dreadnought Soul's Vengeance, and his ship carried humanity's most terrible weapon. Chief Engineer Shin Woo-jin had designed stellar ignition charges that could trigger premature supernovas and collapse the dimensional barriers that kept unstable regions of space from tearing reality apart. The plan is simple, Oh Seung-hwan explained to his fleet commanders. We hit them with everything we have while Captain Lim gets close enough to deploy the stellar charges. The explosion will collapse the dimensional barriers around the nest and drag the entire structure into the black hole at the gap's center. Admiral, asked Commander Velnara, who had survived human tactical training and now commanded a coalition battle group, what are the chances that our fleet survives this operation? Oh Seung-hwan was quiet for a moment. Commander, I'm not going to lie to you. Most of us won't be going home. The swarm has had millions of years to prepare defenses, and they know we're coming. But if we succeed here, our children will never have to face this enemy. The silence that followed was broken by Captain Lim Jae-hyun. Admiral, permission to speak freely? Granted. My crew and I volunteered for this mission knowing it was one way. We're not here because we want to die. We're here because we want our deaths to mean something. Every species in this fleet has the same choice. We can die fighting, or we can live as slaves until the swarm decides to consume us too. Throughout the fleet, similar conversations were taking place as crews prepared for what many knew would be their final battle. Human ships were loaded with nuclear weapons and kinetic bombardment systems. Coalition vessels carried quantum torpedoes and plasma artillery that could sterilize worlds. Every weapon that sentient beings had ever devised was represented in the Allied fleet. But the real preparation was happening in the laboratories where Dr. Song Yoon-ji was putting the finishing touches on humanity's biological weapons. Months of research had produced bacterial strains that could spread through swarm neural networks faster than the creatures could adapt. The weapons were loaded into delivery systems that would disperse them throughout the enemy nest. General Bay, these weapons will kill everything in the target area, Song Eun-ji warned as the biological warheads were transferred to attack ships. The bacterial strains are designed to consume any organic matter they encounter. Once we deploy them there, won't be anything left alive in the entire gap. Doctor, that's exactly what we want. The swarm has consumed billions of innocent beings over the centuries. It's time for them to face extinction themselves. The approach to the Andromeda Gap took 3 days, and every hour brought new horrors. Space itself seemed hostile to life, and several ships suffered system failures that couldn't be explained by conventional physics. Reality was thinner here, and things moved in the darkness between dimensions that had no names in any language. Fleet Admiral, we're detecting massive energy signatures ahead, reported the sensor officer aboard Oh Seung-hwan's flagship. The swarm nest is larger than our estimates indicated. Current readings suggest a structure approximately 1 light-year in diameter. The main display updated to show the true scope of their enemy, and even hardened military veterans fell silent. The swarm nest wasn't just a space station. It was an artificial star system with the nest itself at the center, like a dark sun surrounded by orbital platforms and defense networks that stretched across impossible distances. Communications to all ships, Oh Seung-hwan ordered. Battle stations, deploy all weapons systems. Launch fighters and prepare for final approach. What happened next was the largest battle in galactic history. Millions of swarm creatures poured out of the nest like a tide of living darkness while the Allied fleet met them with enough firepower to destroy star systems. Human nuclear weapons created temporary suns that illuminated the twisted space of the gap, while coalition quantum torpedoes tore holes in reality itself. The battle was chaos on a scale that defied description. Ships the size of cities exchanged, fire with creatures that had devoured entire civilizations, space filled with debris and energy discharges, and the screams of dying beings broadcast across every communication frequency. Captain Lim Jae-hyun pushed Seoul's vengeance through the heart of the battle while his crew fought to keep the ship functional long enough to reach their target. Around them, the Allied fleet was being systematically destroyed by enemies that seemed to pour endlessly from the nest's interior. "Captain, we've lost main engines and hull integrity is at 30%, reported his engineering officer. "We're not going to make it to the deployment zone." "Yes, we are," Lim Jae-hyun said, and his voice carried the certainty of someone who had already accepted his fate. "Reroute all power to the forward thrusters. Emergency acceleration. Sir, that will overload our reactor." "Good. We'll use the explosion to get extra velocity." Seoul's vengeance accelerated toward the swarm nest, trailing fire and debris while its crew worked frantically to prepare the stellar charges. Behind them, the Allied fleet was fighting a desperate delaying action that was costing ships and lives with every passing minute. "Captain, we're in range," reported the weapons officer. "Stellar charges are armed and ready. Deploy all charges. Set timers for maximum effect." The stellar ignition charges launched from Seoul's vengeance like seeds of destruction scattered across the heart of the swarm nest. Each charge was designed to trigger a controlled supernova that would collapse the dimensional barriers, keeping the gap stable. "Charges deployed, Captain. Impact in 30 seconds. Lim Jae-hyun activated the ship's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Captain Lim Jae-hyun of the Earth ship Seoul's Vengeance to all Allied forces. Charges are away. You have 5 minutes to reach minimum safe distance." "Captain Lim, this is Fleet Admiral Oh Seung-hwan. What's your status?" "Admiral, our reactor is critical and we have no engines. We won't be making it out." "Understood, Captain. Your sacrifice will be remembered. Admiral, tell my family that I died protecting them. Tell them that humanity answered when the galaxy called for help." The stellar charges detonated simultaneously and space itself began to collapse. The swarm nest that had grown for millions of years died in minutes as artificial stars tore through its structure and dimensional barriers failed, catastrophically. Reality twisted and folded as the gap's central black hole began consuming everything within light years. Seoul's vengeance was caught in the collapse, and its final transmission was heard across the fleeing Allied fleet. "This is Captain Lim Jae-hyun. Mission accomplished. The nest is destroyed. Tell the galaxy that when darkness threatened civilization, humanity answered with flames." The explosion that followed could be seen from neighboring galaxies. When the light faded, the Andromeda Gap was gone, and with it, the primary swarm nest that had been the source of untold horror for millions of years. The void swarm that remained in the galaxy was scattered and leaderless, and for the first time since the war began, they were retreating instead of advancing. Fleet Admiral Oh Seung-hwan stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and looked out at the debris field that marked the grave of heroes. President Young Mirai stood at the memorial wall in the Earth orbital station and ran her fingers over the names carved into black stone. 10,000 human names, joined by 100,000 more from species across the galaxy. Each name represented someone who had answered the call when darkness threatened civilization and paid the ultimate price for victory. 6 months had passed since the Battle of the Andromeda Gap, and the galaxy was still adjusting to a reality without the Void Swarm. The scattered remnants of the enemy were being hunted down by combined human-alien task forces, and new colonies were being established in systems that had been abandoned for centuries. "Madam President, the Coalition Council is ready for your address," announced her aide as he approached the memorial wall where young Mirai was paying her respects to the fallen. Thank you. Tell them I'll be there in a moment. She touched one name in particular before turning away. Captain Lim Jae-hyun had become a legend across the galaxy, and his final words were carved into memorial walls on 100 worlds. His sacrifice had saved billions of lives and ensured that future generations would inherit a galaxy free from the shadow of the swarm. The Coalition Council chamber had been rebuilt after the war, and now included representatives from species that had been liberated from swarm occupation. The chamber was larger than before and filled with beings who had thought they would never see their homeworlds again. Ambassador Ryu Chanwoo met Young Mirai at the entrance to the chamber. Madam President, the vote was unanimous. Every species in the galaxy wants humanity to take a permanent seat on the council. What did you tell them? That humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to protect it. Young Mirai entered the chamber and took her place at the podium where she would address representatives of 73 species. The holographic displays showed star charts of the galaxy with green markers indicating systems that were free and safe for the first time in centuries. Representatives of the Galactic Council, she began, and her words were translated into dozens of languages. 6 months ago, this chamber was filled with desperation and fear. Species that had fought bravely for centuries were losing ground to an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Today we gather not as desperate allies but as partners in building a future that our children will inherit. The applause that followed came from beings who had survived horrors that would have broken lesser civilizations. They had watched their worlds burn and their people die, but they had endured and ultimately prevailed through unity and sacrifice. Timao, war against the Void Swarm taught us many things. It taught us that different approaches to warfare can complement each other. It taught us that sometimes the price of peace is the willingness to fight with everything we have. Most importantly, it taught us that when civilized beings stand together, no darkness can prevail against them. General Park Soon-ho was working in his office on the Coalition Military Academy on Proxima Centauri when the news came that the last known swarm creatures had been eliminated from the Outer Rim. The Academy had been established to train officers from all species in combined tactical doctrine that merged human aggression with alien precision and technology. General, the final sweep is complete, reported Colonel Yoon Sora, who had survived more boarding actions than anyone in the galaxy. Task Force 7 reports total elimination of swarm presence in the Vega sector. The galaxy is officially clear of enemy forces. Confirmed elimination or just tactical withdrawal? Confirmed, sir. Dr. Kwon Neon's detection systems show no swarm biosignatures anywhere in the galaxy. If any of them survived, they're not anywhere we can find them. Park Sun-ho nodded and made a note in his files. The galaxy was free, but the vigilance could never end. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies there might be other swarms or other threats that would test civilization's resolve. The military academies and defense forces would be ready for them. Dr. Kwon Neon had spent the months after the war adapting human military technology for peaceful purposes, and the results were transforming galactic civilization. Nuclear weapons, designed to destroy swarm creatures, were being converted into stellar engineering tools that could reignite dead stars and create new solar systems for colonization. The applications are endless, she explained to a gathering of scientists and engineers from across the galaxy. Kinetic bombardment systems can be used for asteroid mining and planet terraforming. Chemical weapons can become industrial processes for breaking down hostile atmospheres. Even our biological weapons have applications in medicine and ecosystem restoration. The transformation was happening on every world that had participated in the war. Species that had learned human tactical methods were applying that same innovative thinking to science and engineering and art. The galaxy was experiencing a renaissance of creativity and exploration that hadn't been seen for millennia. But the most important changes were happening in the hearts and minds of beings who had survived the darkest period in galactic history. Children who had grown up during the war were now adults with a different perspective on what it meant to be part of a galactic community. Ambassador Ryu Chanwoo was visiting one of the new colony worlds when he encountered a group of young beings from a dozen different species playing together in a park that had been built on the site of a former swarm breeding facility. Human children played alongside Altarians and Velkarian species that had been enemies for centuries before the war brought them together. Ambassador Ryu asked a young human girl named Park Sumi, My teacher says that before the war, different species didn't trust each other. Is that true? It is true. Many species had been fighting small wars and trade disputes for thousands of years. We were so busy arguing with each other that we almost didn't notice the real enemy until it was too late. But that's silly. My best friends are Zethkari and Velnaran. We're all different, but we're all people. Ryu Chanwu smiled as he watched the children play games that combined elements from all their cultures. Yes, you're all people. And that's the most important lesson the war taught us. The memorial ceremony for the Battle of the Andromeda Gap was held on the anniversary of the victory, and beings from across the galaxy gathered to honor those who had died to secure the peace. President Jung Mirai delivered the keynote address from the memorial on Earth, but her words were broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Today, we remember those who answered when the galaxy called for help: human and alien, military and civilian, scientists and soldiers, and ordinary people who did extraordinary things when civilization needed them most. They came from different worlds and different cultures, but they shared one thing in common. They refused to let darkness win. The ceremony included readings of names from every species that had participated in the war. It took 6 hours to read them all, and by the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the galaxy. Each name represented someone's parent or child or friend who had given everything so that others might live free. The war is over, but our vigilance must never end. Somewhere in the darkness beyond our galaxy, there may be other threats waiting for us to grow complacent. We must remain strong and united, and ready to defend the light we have kindled among the stars. As the ceremony concluded, memorial flames were lit on every world in the galaxy. The flames would burn for 1 year as a reminder of the price of freedom and the courage of those who paid it. Children who had never known the fear of the swarm would tend those flames and learn from their parents about the time when darkness threatened everything that lived. Dr. Kwan Nyon published her final research report on the applications of human military technology and concluded with observations that would be studied for generations. The tools of war can become instruments of peace when guided by wisdom and compassion. The same drive that made humans terrifying enemies made them powerful protectors. The galaxy called for warriors, but humanity gave them something more valuable. They gave them guardians. The new Galactic Compact was signed 5 years after the end of the war and established principles that would govern interstellar relations for millennia. The document was written in simple language that children could understand because the beings who wrote it wanted to ensure that future generations would never forget the lessons learned in blood and sacrifice. The first principle was simple. When any member of the galactic community is threatened, all members are threatened. We stand together or we fall separately. The second principle was harder to accept for some species, but equally important. Sometimes the price of peace is war. Sometimes the price of civilization is the willingness to be uncivilized when necessary. We will do whatever it takes to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The third principle had been suggested by humanity and adopted unanimously. We remember those who died so that we might live. We honor their sacrifice by building a galaxy worthy of their memory. Ambassador Ryu Chanwu's final report to Earth summarized humanity's role in galactic civilization. When the galaxy called, humanity answered with flames, not because we loved destruction, but because we loved life too much to let darkness claim it. The fires of war have ended, but the light they ignited burns eternal among the stars.